This is Ron Vanderwell, who is the STM serving at Crossroads Madison. Welcome back on, Ron. It's good to talk with you again.
Thanks, Zach. Good to talk with you again.
This is something of a farewell because Ron is out of here by the time this airs. About a week and a couple days, and your time of service at Crossroads has come to an end. And I know there's very many people appreciative of what you've done, and just thought it'd be a good opportunity to summarize your work over there at Crossroads the last, 9 months? Is it longer than that?
It was a one-year contract with the possibility of extensions, and so we extended it for 3 months. So the end of this month, end of May, it will have been 15 months.
Oh, great. Well, why don't you share a little bit about your work and whatever else has been on your mind?
Sure. Maybe the best way to kind of give you a summary of that is to talk about an event that happened Sunday here at Crossroads after church. There was a congregational update after the morning service, and so people stayed behind, and members of the council could share some of what's going on. And the most important thing, there's some cool things, encouraging things to be described there. But I think the most important thing about that meeting is what I did in it. And that was very little. I opened in prayer, and then I closed in prayer when it was done. And most of the presentation was the chair of council. And there was a lot of really pretty encouraging news coming out of it. Yeah. Despite the fact that Crossroads has really struggled and is a lot smaller, they could talk about one of the big concerns has been the budget. Do we have the money to continue? And that's a big aspect of church's viability. And the answer is yes. There's actually, I'm one of the most expensive parts of the budget, frankly, and I'm leaving in 2 weeks, as you just said. And our youth pastor is also going to somewhere else, and because Crossroads doesn't have youth, that's not actually, it's a shame, and Ryan's done a great job, but it's not like it's a key ministry for Crossroads to continue. So actually, financially, the church is doing really well, and it has a lot of open road in front of it. The council shared that there's a plan in place for a preaching team, which is another one of the big concerns, like who's going to be preaching on Sunday. Yeah. And the idea being is that if it's, let's swing by church on Sunday and see if anyone's there, would very quickly take any life or momentum out of the ministry. And currently the council has arranged a team of 3 different pastors who can sort of take turns on a schedule preaching. And these are pastors who've been involved in Crossroads over time. They know the story of the kind of death and slow rebirth here. And there's some relationship with the congregation because they've all 3 preached here. So that also feels good, I think, for everybody, because we can come on Sunday without having to wonder if we'll be the only car in the parking lot, or if it's some preacher off Facebook Marketplace who showed up. So the low bidder or something. Yeah. So that was all really encouraging, and there was some people could ask questions if they wished, or others. But the several things that were remarkable about it. One was it was not contentious. There was very few surprises to begin with. Most of the things that have been happening, most of the good developments, have come from members of the congregation. There's a new arm to our council called the ministry team, which is kind of emerged out of the congregation itself. So these are people who are getting to know the director of the preschool across our parking lot, and some other things. So there's a lot of positive things happening, and it's not because I or somebody else are pulling strings behind the scenes. It's because the congregation is healing enough that they can start to reach out with cups of cold water for people who need it. So those are all signs of health, and that was kind of cool to have that Sunday morning. And meetings like that will now be a monthly event here at Crossroads.
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, your kind of work, like anything, is something that you get better at over time. But as you've done these, like what would be some advice you'd give a church that's struggling or hurting? I mean, what kind of encouragement could you give?
That's a good question. One thing I would say is that I would encourage churches to resist sweeping generalizations as to what's possible for God to do in their church. And I say that thinking two different directions with that. One is it's easy to have it all, everything boiled down to a thumbs up, thumbs down. Does our church have a chance or not? And because nobody really wants to think about their church dying, or maybe people have already decided this is too painful. I got to bail. I'm out of here. I don't want to be part of this. They kind of want to force the thumb up or force it down. And doing so, I think, tends to squeeze out a lot of the really productive stuff that God may want to do in people or in churches. That's one thing I would say. The second thing is to not be in a hurry to force God's hand with it. Most people at Crossroads don't know for a fact whether this church is going to be around for a year or not. They talked about that with one of the projects that has been worked on here is developing promotional efforts for renting out this facility. We have a beautiful building, which is far nicer and far bigger than what a church our size needs. And so we can't really, in good conscience, advertise this as a wedding venue for people who might want to reserve it for their wedding a year and a half out if we don't know if Crossroads is going to be in business in a year and a half.
Sure.
There's that wrinkle to it. At the same time, there's a lot of things that God is doing. And so there's a lot of short-term options that the church is looking at or has developed, and developing a relationship with the director of the preschool right on our property, which has been right here for a long time, but we've never really developed a relationship there. Or other things in the community or other churches to partner with. And so there's a lot of things that can be done. Even we spent a Saturday cleaning out some of the classrooms around here that have all sorts of leftover stuff from the rather major remodel and build out around here a year ago when the pandemic first hit. And so we can't rent out those rooms. We can't use those rooms if they're filled with construction stuff. And so let's get everybody together and we'll do that. And then we'll have pizza afterwards. And that was a great Saturday for everybody.
Yeah. What would you say to the individual in a struggling church who is just really concentrating on, the budget line and adding the numbers, and I don't know if the numbers will be there, and looking at the roles and kind of charting all that stuff, and you said don't force God's hand. What would you rather have that person focus on? What are some areas you would encourage them to look at that maybe would be healthier or better for the future of the church?
Yeah, I think a really important thing to look at is, let me back that sentence up. I think it's as important. Obviously, you need to have general fund dollars to run a ministry and to keep the lights on in your building.
Sure.
But I think a far more important factor to consider is just the church's health, the congregation's health. And so that's kind of a tricky thing in a church like Crossroads because, we're not going to count infant baptisms because we don't have infants, because we don't have young families, because we don't have their parents. We have their grandparents. And so there's a lot of people in their 70s and 80s. There's a number of people in their 70s and 80s who comprise most of this congregation. So obviously that number matters. at the same time, that's not, you don't want to be reductionist and say, well, God can only work through churches that have this percentage of, kids in school or whatever, because God can still do stuff. And so, for instance, what I've seen around here, and I think what has changed a lot of our general predisposition here, is God bringing things like reconciliation. People who were pretty much alienated from each other have worked through some really difficult stuff around here. Also, people have let go of some of the things that just felt like drop dead issues for them, and instead are focusing more on efforts that aren't just to protect their church, but efforts that are aimed at reaching out to a community around here. And those are things that are much more, they smell a lot more like the Holy Spirit and much less like church fights.
Yeah. So focusing on metrics that might be unique to your ministry, maybe is the shortest answer.
Yeah, I think I would also add to that description, focus on the things that could only have come from God. So for instance, a change in the budget, or what we do with the kitchen, or whatever, the service time, or what kind of music or whatever. Those are things we can make changes pretty easily. On the other hand, we can't make more joy. And there's a lot more joy around here. People have talked about that.
That's excellent.
And one thing I know about joy is I can change my mind, but I can't change my heart. And the same thing is true of churches. And so if there's a lot more joy around here, it's probably not because of the guy preaching or the people on council.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, how can we be praying for you and your family in this time of transition, and Crossroads for that matter too?
Yeah, I think as far as praying for Crossroads, I think I would just love to have people be praying for the wisdom and the courage needed to continue making the most of the momentum that God's providing here. There's a lot of opportunities to do things, and yet it's a fragile congregation, and it would be really easy for people to get discouraged at the first speed bumps that come along its way. And there'll be a lot of jury rigging that will be needed in the next months or year, just to get used to a lot of changes. And so that will take quite a bit to do that. And so I guess, frankly, I would love to see people be praying for that. As far as Deb and me moving forward, for the summer, we just want to rest. This has been a challenge here. And we want to just take some time to kind of catch our breath. We have grown kids who live in different places across the country, 3 kids, 2 of them are married. And one of them has an adorable granddaughter that we want to spend time with in California. So that's our summer for the most part. And then we'll resume these kinds of gigs, helping churches rebuild next fall.
That's great. Just one more question I thought of as you were sharing that. We were talking before I hit record, just the nature of your type of ministry requires some seasons of rest in the middle. But just another, asking for advice for the congregant. Where if I'm a congregant in a church in need of restoration, I suppose all churches are in need of restoration. But how would you encourage me to find rest?
First answer would be that ultimately, I don't know exactly what kind of rest you might have in mind in asking that, but I would imagine that if you and I if you were that congregant and you and I had a 10-minute conversation about where the need for rest is coming from, I would imagine it would come down to something that has to do with God's sufficiency and embedding God. No, that's the wrong way to say it. creating room for God to embed himself in the middle of this thing that we're striving for. And that's a really important thing to learn how to do. And there are days when I think I suck at it. And that's why I need some time off, I think. But at the same time, the further we go as individuals or as churches, the more we realize that Jesus did promise that he would be with us always, and that he's not done in a church until he's done in a church.
Yeah.
And it's a shame for us to try to shut him down before he wants to.
Yeah. Well, really, really valuable insights, Ron, and we appreciate what you've done for Classis Wisconsin and for Crossroads, and God's blessings as you go.
Hey, thank you very much. It's been a gift. I've never known much about the churches in this Classis. Most of my experience has been elsewhere, and it's been really cool to sense the community in this Classis and among pastors, and even you and I doing these interviews together. That's been good.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction, I think.